Bon Scott was discovered last night in the car. Scotland Yard spokesman said specifically that there were no suspicious circumstances surrounding Bon Scott's death.
Well, everybody's really shocked, and they were in pre-production in London at the time for their forthcoming Atlantic album, so things have been put on hold for a while.
Bon Scott was the original lead vocalist and lyricist for the legendary hard rock band acdc until his untimely death in 1980. But since then, details have gradually come to light, fueling more rumour and speculation. The official report states that Bon Scott had visited a London club called the Music Machine with an acquaintance called Alistair Kinnear. Kinnear had driven them back to his flat at 67 Overhill Road, East Dulwich. Bon, who'd spent the whole evening drinking heavily, was asleep. Kinnear couldn't wake him and apparently couldn't move him. It was February, it was England, and it was cold. So Kinnear covered Bon with a blanket and left him in his Renault 5 car to sleep off the booze. And so it's assumed sometime during the late evening of the 18th of February and early morning of Tuesday the 19th of February 1980, Scott died at the age of 33. Kinnear discovered Bon's lifeless body in the evening of the 19th of February, allegedly having spent the whole day asleep. Bon's body was taken to nearby King's College Hospital, with the coroner concluding that he died of acute alcohol poisoning. Ronald Belford Scott was born on the 9th of July 1946 in Forfar, Scotland. In 1952, the Scott family moved to Melbourne, Australia. And it was here when he was given the nickname Bon by classmates in school, short for Bonnie Scotland. In 1956, the Scott family relocated to Fremantle, Western Australia. By the age of 15, he dropped out of art college and spent the next 3 years picking up odd jobs and getting into trouble with the local police, which would eventually get him sent to the Riverbank Juvenile Institution. An early music career began with 2 cover bands called the Spectres and the Valentines, where he would develop his talent for drumming and singing. By 1970, he was singing in the band Fraternity, a sort of early prog rock outfit. But by 1974, he was without a band again. But not for long. Bon had managed to get a gig as a chauffeur for a certain glam rock band who were making waves in the local music scene. They were based out of Sydney. 2 brothers, also originally from Scotland, just like Bon, Angus and Malcolm Young. They were the guitarists. They were called acdc.
I used to work for the band. I used to work for an agency in South Australia, and I was the chauffeur. And I used to drive the band around from hotel to the gig and back to the hotel, you know. And these guys were looking for a singer, you know. And I said, I can sing. So they gave me a tryout, and I got the job. So I went from being the chauffeur to the singer.
acdc had already found their feet, ditching their early glam look and taking on board a much grittier sound. And in late September 1974, Bon Scott replaced original singer Dave Evans. The planets had aligned. Bon's unique vocal range, wild charisma, and rebellious spirit were the perfect fit for acdc's raw, energetic sound. For the next 5 years, the band released a line of impressive studio albums, toured relentlessly across Europe and the US, relocated to London, and then in 1979 released the iconic album, Highway to Hell. And this was the moment that propelled them to international fame, smashing it in the USA, the most important music market in the world. From September 79 to January 1980, the band tore up stages on the Highway to Hell tour, with Bon showing off his devil-may-care attitude. acdc had an electrifying stage presence that no other band could compete with. The band had finally made the big time. So as the official report states, death by misadventure, alcohol poisoning. But for many, they took issue with this. Something wasn't right. The guy who'd left Bon in the car, Alistair Kinnear, after an interview with the London Evening Standard newspaper, well, he just disappeared, leaving behind a flat that was ransacked by burglars. The rumour mill went into full swing. Why would somebody just uproot themselves and not be heard of again by those who he'd been friendly with? Of course, there's nothing illegal with somebody actually doing that. But you have to admit, it's a very strange thing to do, isn't it? In the mid-90s, a biography called Highway to Hell, The Life and Times of acdc legend Bon Scott was published. Written by Clinton Walker, the author attempted to shed light on the mystery surrounding Bon's death. According to Walker, on February the 18th, Bon phoned an ex-girlfriend, Sylva Smith, to invite her along to see a band in Camden, North London. Sylva declined, but said she had a friend, a certain Alistair Kinnear, who'd be interested to go along with him. Bon and Kinnear ended up at a venue called the Music Machine. Then, a decade later, renowned rock journalist Geoff Barton revisited the events of February 1980. Barton's approach was to interview two specific members of the British rock band UFO, who'd previously toured with acdc and had struck up a good relationship with Bon. There had been rumours that on the evening Bon had died, he'd intended to meet up with the band's vocalist Phil Mogg and bassist Pete Way at the Music Machine. Barton also remembered that at the time, Peter Mensch was critical of the band UFO and their partying, and the bad influence it had on Bon. So in 2005, Barton caught up with former UFO members Pete Way and Paul Chapman, but also added that their recollections shouldn't be taken as gospel, as both were heroin users at that time. So, not exactly a great foundation for transparency, huh? Pete Way's recollection was that an Australian heroin dealer called Joe Silver had arrived with Bon and was hanging out backstage with UFO. UFO were doing drugs, but Way couldn't remember what Bon was up to, other than drinking a lot. Way then remembered how he'd first heard about Bon's death. It was in the morning of the 19th, and Paul Chapman had called him. Chapman needed to call either Angus or Malcolm Young to tell them. Chapman was to then call Malcolm Young. Barton then interviewed Paul Chapman to see if their memories were similar. According to Chapman, he'd met up with Bon and an Australian roadie called Joe in the afternoon of the 18th. Apparently, this Joe was a guitar tech for Chapman and was sharing a flat with Bon. Chapman invited them both to his flat in Fulham, gave them the directions, and that was the last he saw of Bon. And Chapman was quite sure that he remembered Bon saying that he would go and find some heroin to bring back to his flat. Only Bon never showed up. But Joe did. In fact, Joe stayed the whole night and left at 7 a.m. on the 19th. Then at 10 a.m., Chapman received a call from Joe telling him that Bon Scott was dead. And this is where it gets all a little bit confusing, because in the official story, Alistair Kinnear stated that he'd found Bon's body in the evening of the 19th. Yet Pete Way heard about Bon's death in the morning by Paul Chapman, who had called him. That's odd. According to Chapman, Joe had received a call from whoever Bon was with in Dulwich, and then Joe called Chapman. Chapman recalls being told that Bon's body had been found at 5 o'clock in the morning. Barton finally asked the all-important question to Chapman: why was Bon Scott looking for heroin? And his reply: Bon wanted to stay up and party, and if that's what it took for the rest of us to stay up, then he'd go and find it and bring it to us. In 2010, an article in the Australian newspaper, The Telegraph, reported on the one individual who perhaps could answer the mystery surrounding Bon Scott's death: Alistair Kinnear, the last person to see Bon alive. But what they discovered only created more doubt about the official report into Bon's death, and added yet another layer of mystery. The newspaper attempted to track down Alistair Kinnear, and, well, to a point, they were sort of successful. Only they found his family, not Kinnear himself. Apparently Kinnear was missing, having allegedly set sail on a sloop, a sailing boat, called the Danara, from Marseille, with 2 other men in July 2006. They were heading to southern Spain. Only they didn't get there. They just vanished. The Telegraph reported that Kinnear's son, Daniel, confirmed his father was missing, but not legally declared dead. But more intrigue and suspicion. The Telegraph discovered that soon after Kinnear had gone missing, a person claiming to be the skipper of the boat contacted authorities to say Kinnear was safe, but did not want any contact with his family. The message that was passed on: please forget me. Meanwhile, his son was certain he was dead, and even speculated if foul play may have been involved in his disappearance. In 2017, Australian author Jesse Fink published the book Bon, the Last Highway. In it, he claimed that the police investigation and coroner autopsy were flawed. It took less than 72 hours from the discovery of Bon's body for the inquest to be concluded. And importantly, no toxicology report was released. In fact, there's no evidence that such a report even existed, which is really strange. Additionally, Fink discovered inaccuracies in the death certificate, with even Bon's home address being incorrect. And another piece of information which might add a bit more context. According to Clinton Walker, Bon Scott allegedly almost died of a drug overdose in Melbourne in early 1975. Despite only being known as a hard drinker, he never had the reputation of being a drug user. And where Walker got this piece of information, who knows? Well, one thing that we do know is that Bon Scott was surrounded by people who were dealers and users of heroin in his last hours. And as Rania Habal of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine has gone on the record to state, alcohol is a very common co-ingestant in heroin overdoses. Additionally, a fatal heroin overdose is nearly always caused by respiratory arrest. The mystery surrounding Bon Scott's death will likely never be resolved. A lot of the people who were there at the time have either passed on or, as in Kinnear's case, have just disappeared. And of course there are so many conflicting recollections and question marks about the investigation and report. It's genuinely like something out of a thriller novel.
Bon, The other boys of the band say that you're great, but a little special. Do you know what they mean by that?
I'm a special drunkard. I drink too much.
What do you think they really mean?
I don't know. It could be anything coming from them.
Do you feel you're a star?
No, I see stars sometimes.
But of course, the tragedy of Bon Scott's death certainly doesn't define the man. acdc and the estate of Bon Scott have always been private about the issue, and rightly so. The band was to continue holding the torch for Bon's style of hard rock and take their success to another stratosphere. And one thing is for sure, they would never have achieved this without Bon's influence in the band. Bon Scott was the true embodiment of raw-edged rock and roll, whose voice, humorous and often provocative lyrics, and of course his personality, helped shape the sound of classic rock and inspire countless artists around the world.
Rock and roll, the kind of rock and roll that brings out the goosebumps, the sweat.
Do you have a sister?
No, I don't have a sister.
Wants to travel overnight to Wheeling, West Virginia?
When are you leaving?
Right now.
There's a girl out in the steps out there waiting.
Yeah?
Yeah.
His legacy is massive, from memorials in Scotland to Fremantle in Australia. And according to the National Trust of Australia, his grave is the most visited in the entire country, leading them to say that Bon Scott is one of Australia's most treasured cultural icons. His influence remains enduring, and his legend lives on.
And I ain't too old to hurry, 'cause I ain't too old to die, but I sure am hard to beat.